Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of TI Talks. I am Ricki and I'm joined today by none other than our resident reporter, Nicole Deslandes. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for joining me today for this podcast.
Hi Ricki, thanks so much for having me.
This is a podcast in honor of our special themed Health Tech Week at TechInformed. Later on, we'll be treated to an interview that I conducted with Pico XR, all about how VR and XR is used in healthcare in various different ways. Before that, Nicole is here to tell us all about an article that she wrote this week, all about 3 femtech firms and how they are shaking up the health tech space. Nicole, please tell us more.
Thank you, Ricki. So at the beginning of September time, I went to Tech Barbecue in Copenhagen, which is a tech conference, and I met 2 really amazing people that are, one of them is a founder of a femtech firm called The Blood. I'll talk more about that later. And another one is part of another femtech firm called Phenomex. And then recently I also spoke to a founder of Hormony, and all of those firms are using data to transform female health. A common theme throughout all of our interviews and things is just how under-researched women's health is and how that's been such a huge challenge for them, because you can't just go in and use all the data that you can have available and work with that. You have to first collect it, which is something that essentially all 3 of them are doing at the moment.
So why is that space so under-researched, Nicole?
I mean, there's a huge gender data gap in general. There's a really good book by Caroline Criado Perez, which is called Invisible Women, that kind of covers everything about gender data and how it's always been a bit male-dominated. But in terms of health, there's a few stats. McKinsey has done a few studies. In 2020, only 1% of healthcare research and innovation was invested in female-specific conditions beyond oncology. But the thing is, according to the same research, every $1 invested in female health would turn around to $3 in economic growth. So clearly it's needed, and clearly it's worth it for investment. This is because of fewer earlier deaths and improved health, so women can contribute to society and the economy. It's just as simple as that. And then also a 2016 study found that out of 112 internal medicine residency programs, only 25% didn't include menopause in their core curriculum. That's also only 30% talks about contraception and 40% PCOS, which is a condition that affects the ovaries. On any given day, 800 million people are on their period, which is quite significant, and considering it's so under-researched, it's obviously needed. And then according to other studies, 31% of women experience severe issues with their reproductive health in the UK. All these firms just discussed that there's such a lack of data that they're actually having to work to get this data first in order to get digital technologies involved.
So on that note, can you tell us a bit about Phenomex and Harmony and what they do?
I've grouped those 2 together because they are both focusing on menopause. So Phenomex is a platform where essentially you fill in a survey and then it gives you personalized recommendations in terms of nutrition and routines, and helps, you can put in your symptoms and it gives you recommendations on how to ease your symptoms. So there's so many symptoms with menopause, it's crazy. And another stat, which is really interesting, is that you're more likely to be diagnosed with a female-related health condition, if you go to a female doctor compared to a male. And across the globe, it's 40% of GPs are women. So there's still about 60% of men, so you might be misdiagnosed. And then Hormony, which is quite interesting, they are working on a platform that you essentially do a saliva test, which is an instant test. So you just get it sent to you, and it will also give you recommendations on how to handle your menopause symptoms, and it can measure your hormone balance and help in terms of that.
And what about The Blood? What are they doing?
The Blood was founded by two women. One of them I spoke to at Tech Barbecue called Isabel Kazoo. I spoke to Isabel at Tech Barbecue and she co-founded The Blood. What inspired her is after she got diagnosed with endometriosis and she realised that there was so much more needed to help with women and getting diagnosed and also getting help with their menstrual cycle just in general and getting help with symptoms related to their menstrual cycle.
What was your conclusion from the article? Like, how did it change your perspective about the health tech industry and space?
It definitely opened my eyes to just the big gender data gap in terms of female health. It also made me really optimistic for the future. So stuff like this is really exciting for the future and for the future of my generation as well. Hopefully by the time we go through the menopause, we'll have all this help there ready for us.
Cool, interesting. I will definitely give that a read, and so should you, listeners, because it sounds very, very interesting for men and women to know all of this information. Well, right now we are very lucky to be joined by the Commercial Director of Healthcare Training and Education at Pico XR, Rob Pereira. Pico uses VR across various sectors, including healthcare, education and training, etc. But Rob is here today to talk to us all about how VR is changing patient care and diagnostics in the healthcare space, plus a little bit about what the future holds for VR and XR in this space. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me and for having me. Happy to be here.
So when we speak about VR and XR in the healthcare space, we often think about education and training, but that area is covered quite extensively, I think. So I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about how Pico is using VR and XR in pain management and even during surgeries. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The thing is, there's a lot of healthcare applications, and healthcare itself is a very broad term, right? So we have on one hand things like trainings of surgeons or of nurses. Those kind of applications very often draw a lot of attention. But again, the healthcare is essentially a pyramid where you have one or two surgeons at the top, then you have a lot of nurses, but then the vast majority of people involved in healthcare are the patients. They don't get as much attention and as much interest as the other things. But in healthcare, this is one of our main areas where we deploy VR headsets or XR headsets, as we call them, and patient care, but also everything that leads up to patient care is relevant. And when I say everything that leads up to patient care, then I mean things like diagnostics, right? Diagnosing ADHD, diagnosing things like PTSD, phobias, concussions. I mean, there's a very vast area that you can use virtual reality in combination maybe with other technologies such as eye tracking to identify and then also treat those conditions. But then there's also the physical rehabilitation and things that we can do with the body with a virtual reality headsets. And finally, then also, again, patient-facing, we would be looking at things like pain management. And you already teased it kind of. So there is the chronic pain management or as well acute pain management. So you go into the hospital and you have something, you get on a virtual reality headset on and you're just in another world and you forget about the pain that you have. You're distracted. So there's a whole science about distracting people visually from their real pain and putting them into another virtual world, so to say. And it goes as far as using virtual reality headsets in surgery. And this is, I think, you mentioned this, but we have a couple of cases where a patient with over 100 years had a hip surgery, a hip replacement. And they used virtual reality headsets to get him into a state where he wouldn't feel as much pain. And that allowed the doctors in that case to lower the dosage of the medicine, so the painkillers and so on, by about 93%, which is immense. And you can also imagine there's lots of side effects with this, right? Especially for elderly people. getting a lot of medicine or a lot of medication can lead to issues, and as well the recovery process after that and so on. And we have a couple of really interesting studies and cases where this has been used in hip replacement or in thorax surgeries and in a lot of other areas.
Actually, you mentioned that during surgeries they can reduce the amount of anesthesia by, I think you said 93% or something. So I assume, so I guess that's one form of sort of measuring how effective the technology is in pain management. But what other kinds of measures are there to kind of measure success in this type of use case?
Well, that is definitely one, and probably for hospitals or for the doctors, that is probably the most relevant metric. They, in the end, they want to reduce side effects, they want to reduce costs and so on. The other side is, of course, the patients and what they say about virtual reality and diving into these worlds and so on. And there is quite a lot of acceptance. So back in the days, and this is still something that I hear today, people were saying, oh, there is some motion sickness and I'm afraid of this motion sickness. So today we don't have these issues anymore. And instead we have a very, very high acceptance of people that say, hey, this is fantastic. I would do it again and I would recommend it as well. And I would need to check again all the sources, but it's around 80 to 90% of people that have experienced virtual reality in these pain management situations that would say, hey, super happy with this.
Are there any specific partnerships that you can speak about in terms of how Pico is used in healthcare?
Yeah, so there is so much going on. Again, this is also, I'm looking after Europe and a couple of other countries. We also have the US and China. So there is an incredible ecosystem and a lot of things going on. If we only look at the pain management topic, which we shouldn't, because there is so much more, right? There's mental health therapy, and in mental health, I think you discussed at some point XR Health. They are covering about 100,000 patients in mental health with their XR applications. But then in pain management, we have thousands of devices in France and in Europe being deployed by a company called HypnoVR or SyncVR, and there's a couple others working in there. And then, of course, there's the whole rehabilitation, so physical rehabilitation area where we are working as well with a lot of leading experts. And one of my favorite companies in that area is a company called Corpus VR, and they do physical rehabilitation where you get the virtual reality headset and you are in a gaming situation, also for elderly people, for young people, for everyone, but you kind of forget that you are in pain and you start reaching behind your back because it's part of the game and you start moving. And for those kind of things, we just recently launched our new trackers, these little babies here, and you can put them on a strap around your arms or legs or whatever, and they will manage and they will measure up to the millimeter exact how you're moving, the velocity that you're moving, and they can also see the progress so that the doctors can see the progress of your rehabilitation, for example.
On the topic that you just mentioned there, actually, around mental health areas like ADHD, PTSD, etc., and I think you mentioned phobias before as well. Can you kind of elaborate on the role that VR plays in diagnosing those kinds of conditions, and how does it compare to more traditional diagnostic methods?
We need to improve the way that we diagnose people. In mental health, there's a lot of misdiagnostics, and it takes a long time to find the right diagnostics for a lot of people. This can be long time, can be years, right? And during these years, you are being treated for something that is wrong. So every tool, I would say, that helps us narrow down what is happening to the patient is a very helpful solution for the system. It saves the hospital and the healthcare systems money. It helps the patients, obviously, finding the right help. And I think we are at the very, very beginning of using virtual reality and mixed reality for this kind of diagnostics. When I say at the very beginning, then I don't mean that it's completely new. I've been doing this and working with this technology in this diagnostics area for around 10 years. However, as you know, the healthcare system is not the fastest in implementing this. So in terms of applying this technology into hospitals in the NHS here in Germany or in other countries, we are at the very beginning. And some countries are a little bit faster than other ones, but it all has a long history already of research behind it.
Where would you say is the highest adoption rate geographically?
Yeah, I think the highest adoption is in Europe. I think that is in the Netherlands. They have a very progressive system, but also France has a very interesting and progressive system that also supports patients in this sense. And globally, I think obviously the US has a very wide adoption as well in terms of XR and technology generally.
You said you've been in this space for around a decade. What are the more promising results or emerging trends that you've seen more recently in the field?
That's a good question. So in the 10 years that I've been involved in virtual reality and healthcare, let's say, it started out as a pure research topic. And I used to live in the UK, and we were working a lot with universities in the early stage of understanding, hey, how can I diagnose dementia, Alzheimer, or schizophrenia and other things, right? So we went past this stage of medical and academic exploration and clinical studies, and we are now starting with this deployment. So when you're asking what are the trends is actually that the market is now starting to see this as a viable option, and as well that we get the feedback back from the healthcare system. Hey, this is not only a viable option, it's also improving the results. And on top, it's also cheaper in the end, right? Because you buy one headset, you have a lot of people using the headset instead of producing pills or just having to manufacture one thing for each patient.
You said you've been in this space for around a decade. What are the more promising results or emerging trends that you've seen more recently in the field?
It's hard to believe that Europe is kind of one thing, but then each individual country, they have their own regulations and their own way of using this. So one of the things that I really like seeing right now is that here in Germany, they are starting to accept this as a subscription. So they have like a digital app as a subscription. You go to your doctor, and we're working on a project about ADHD and ADHD treatment. You go to a doctor, and the doctor, instead of prescribing your kid pills, they would prescribe a 20-minute session every day in a virtual reality headset, monitored by the parents and the doctors, of course. But this is then reimbursed by the healthcare system.
And how much is AI being used in this sort of technology? And is Pico using any AI in any way?
So AI is obviously an upcoming topic, super interesting. And AI and virtual reality, they do completely different things, right? So virtual reality is fantastic for rehabilitation, to distract people, to get them away from pain and so on, while artificial intelligence is able to understand the surroundings, maybe the patient data, and suggest things. So there is a separation between those two things. It's not, hey, do I have money to invest in AI, or do I have money to invest in virtual reality? They just do something completely different. But the combination of both is really interesting, especially in things like rehabilitation or pain management, when the headset and artificial intelligence start understanding what is the reaction of the person here, for example, measuring things like pupil dilation, if you have an eye tracker built into the headset, to understand cognitive workload or pain, right? And then the AI can work with this and generate new worlds, or generate new reactions from the virtual reality headset to the patient. Where we see this today is a lot of conversational AI. So the patient starts speaking to someone. This can be used in therapy. This can be used just as a relief to speak to someone in general, but it can also be used Imagine if you want to relax, you want to get rid of anxiety, you tell the AI what is your ideal relaxation scenario. A mountain with a lake, full moon, and then the AI starts generating this and putting you in this very relaxing environment.
Also, to that point, are there any kind of barriers or obstacles in terms of data protection or sort of like patient data in that area? And how does Pico navigate that?
So patient data is super important. Obviously, there's a lot of data potentially linked to the patients, and that belongs either already to the hospital or the patient, obviously. And Pico, from our side, we build dedicated headsets for example, healthcare. And these headsets, they don't need accounts. They don't have any information about the patient at all, right? They could also be used offline and so on. So these are not consumer headsets that gather a lot of the information about the patients. These are headsets made for this kind of application and scenarios. And in this, we respect the patient privacy and the data security and so on. But this, again, is because we use different headsets for this kind of scenarios.
So what excites you the most about the future of VR in healthcare? And are there any kind of breakthroughs on the horizon that we should know about, that we should be looking forward to?
What excites me the most is really that a lot of things are going on, and there is a really good feedback from the market and a lot of interesting projects like this ADHD project, for example, that I spoke about before. That is really, really interesting because it shows that this technology is ready for the masses as well. And it has such a big and positive impact on the patients' lives. So I'm always very, very happy when I see these pain management deployments where patients really accept this and are very happy and relieved about the pain management. And again, things like diagnostics, which are only getting better and better with the development of the technology. So I think what excites me the most is, in the end, the adoption of these technologies and the acknowledgement that they are beneficial not only for the patients, but also for the hospital and the healthcare system.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rob. It's been very educational. I truly have had my mind blown here. Like, this is a lot of information to take in, but it's so interesting and exciting, really, when you think about the future of the space.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And with that, we bring this week's episode of TI Talks to a close, this special health tech themed episode. Thank you again to Rob Pereira from Pico XR for joining us. And thank you, Nicole, for being my co-host today in this episode.
I love health tech and everything. It's so inspiring and also so exciting in terms of our futures.
Thank you all very much for joining us this week. I've been Ricki, she's been Nicole, and this has been TI Talks. So until next time, stay informed.
Bye.